Welcome to Coaching Kidlit, a podcast about writing and publishing good Kidlit. We dig into various aspects of writing craft through a Kidlit lens and provide inspiration and clear, actionable items to help writers like you move forward on their Kidlit writing journeys. I'm Sharon Skinner, author, accelerator, certified book coach, and author of speculative fiction and Kidlit, including picture books, middle grade, and young adult. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Coaching Kidlit. Today, our guest is Aubre Andrus. Aubre is the award-winning author and ghostwriter of more than 50 books for kids published by American Girl, National Geographic Kids, Lonely Planet Kids, Disney, Scholastic, and more. She's a former American Girl magazine editor and is also the author of the Look Up series, a career book series for kids featuring real modern women in ridiculously fun STEM careers, which she published herself. Her most recent books include Chi-Chi's Story from Scholastic, a narrative nonfiction middle grade novel based on a true story, and America Celebrates, the most incredible and influential people, places, and events of the last 250 years from Quarto. Both projects were works for hire. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Aubre. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You have 50 books. That's a lot of books. You've written a lot of books.
Yeah, I think it's even more. I just lost count.
So tell us a little bit how you got here.
Yeah, so I started as an editor at American Girl magazine, and honestly, within my first month of working there, we sat next to the book department, the nonfiction, contemporary, like advice and activity type books, different from the historical fiction, if anyone's familiar with American Girl. And I just noticed that they were developing projects in-house with help from the marketing department, and then hiring former editors at American Girl to write these books. And I didn't know it was called work for hire at the time, but I was seeing these projects get developed with help from marketing, ideas they knew would sell, and then just bringing in a freelance writer to execute it. And so I was very intrigued. And so flash forward a bit, and I left American Girl, took a new job, but also was interested in freelancing on the side. My dream was to be a children's book author. So slowly but surely, I did get a couple projects from American Girl writing books, and it was super exciting, but I didn't really know where to go from there because American Girl is in Middleton, Wisconsin. They're very sectioned off from the rest of the publishing industry. Years later, they would have some partnerships with other publishers, but this was before that time. I didn't live in New York. I lived in Wisconsin and Chicago. And so I really had to start networking with editors to try to get more work for hire projects. And that's sort of what my whole career has been based on now. So I've had so much fun doing it that I just haven't really stopped.
That's awesome. You've also done some self-publishing. Tell us a little bit about why you jumped into that.
Yeah, through my work for hire projects, I started to learn a lot about publishing over the years, and I felt very comfortable with my knowledge. And I'd worked with so many different publishers, so many different editors on so many different topics, which is a benefit of work for hire. And I really wanted to put my knowledge to the test. And I had this idea. I'd always been interested in self-publishing, so I had been researching it for probably 10 years, but just never knew what I wanted to dive in with. And I was pregnant with my second daughter, and I didn't really know how to get career women in front of them, like role models. Like I signed my daughter up for a female pediatrician and a female dentist and really went out of my way to do that. But I just didn't know how this would work in the future. So I sort of wrote the book series that I wish I had on two parts, as one as a mom and then two as a kid, because I really wanted to be an Imagineer when I was growing up. Basically, I thought I would be a theme park engineer for Disney. And that never happened. And it was kind of like, why didn't this happen? One day I was pulling onto the Disney publishing campus, and to my right, I saw the Imagineering building. And I was like, oh my God, I'm here, but I'm not going into that building. I'm going into the publishing building. Why? What was missing? So it was kind of twofold, this idea. And I just got really jazzed about it and went for it. And yeah, it was so eye-opening. It really demystified publishing for me because some of my books had been submitted for awards and I won them, which was really great. But sometimes my books wouldn't be submitted for awards. I wasn't really sure how that all worked. And so now having my own series, I got to peek behind the curtain and see how certain things like award nominations and wins work. And come to find out, it was super easy to apply and not expensive. And I won a couple awards for my book series. So it was like, oh, I feel like as an author, you're kept in the dark. This is actually not that hard and not that complicated and not even that expensive. So it was just really refreshing to get that angle into the true behind the scenes of publishing as an author, because I do feel like we're often very much kept in the dark. So, and I felt very empowered.
Well, congratulations on the awards.
Thank you.
I would like to dig in a little bit to the difference now because you've also continued to do work for hire. So now you kind of had a sneak peek behind the curtain, but you're still doing work for hire. So let's dig into why that's still of value.
Yeah, I love to talk about career strategy, and I feel like that doesn't come up a lot with writers. For me, it's diversifying my income. I really loved work for hire, but I did feel a bit like a hamster on a wheel just in general as a freelance writer. Writing a book is exhausting to do it over and over again. There was one year before I had kids where I wrote 14 books, I think, and they were not all long books. Some of them were early readers, but like that was a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So I was feeling burned out. So I wanted some passive income. I was able to pump out those projects really fast. I rapid released 5 books before my daughter was born. And for me, that was what I felt like would be passive income during my maternity leave, which was a good idea in theory, but it turns out marketing a book series is very hard. So it certainly was a bit of passive income. And I continue to market that book series and try to break in because it is so hard to break through the noise, specifically on Amazon. Beating the algorithm on Amazon is very hard.
Yeah, that's true. The challenge is that you, as an author, need to do your own marketing. Now, here's the difference, right? So, two things I want to touch on. So, first of all, passive income versus direct income, right? So, passive income being that with your self publishing, you get to receive income ongoing. You get the royalties, all of it's yours because you put everything up front into it. But with work for hire, you typically get what, a single payment?
Yes, you do get a single flat fee. I will say though, I have gotten royalties on quite a few projects. I think that is a big misconception with work for hire that there's no such thing as royalties, and that has not been true for me. But those royalties eventually dry up. You know, if a book stops being published, you're not getting royalties on it anymore, and that is a very likely scenario for most books.
Yeah. And do you have an agent that you go through, or is this all been direct for you because you got to know the editors, as you said before?
No agent. And that is my big thing I love to talk about is that, and don't get me wrong, I think agents are great. They're wonderful people and an absolute necessity for certain paths to publishing and can offer you huge career guidance and strategy in your career that you could not find on your own. But for me, I started without an agent and have not needed one. I've just done all the networking on my own. And I find it funny when I go to writers' conferences or retreats because the agents always get hounded. Yeah, everyone wants to talk to the agents. And there's usually a handful of editors there too, and nobody talks to them. And it's just funny to me because that's who I'm talking to, because they are not only at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to be buying your projects. Of course, you got to get the agent first, who's then going to sell it to an editor. But there is such a thing as writers networking directly with editors, getting a book deal, and then finding an agent to represent them. So it is always good to know an editor and get to know editors.
So you don't have an agent. So when you get a contract for a work for hire book, do you run it by someone who is a literary contract expert, or do you feel that that's a good step for an author, especially starting out?
There are publishing lawyers that you can reach out to review a contract for you. Also, the Authors Guild will review contracts for free, which is great. At some point, you get pretty familiar with the contracts, and frankly, they're not going to change them for you with these types of projects. The things you can change, and I am not a lawyer, so this is just things that I have changed, might just be like asking for more author copies, asking for a higher payment upfront, adjusting the timeline or the payment schedule, asking for royalties, seeing if that's an option. And I sometimes do craft books, so I might be negotiating like if there is a budget for supplies, if I'm doing like a craft or a science book, and that kind of thing. Also where your name is appearing. Is it on the cover? Is it on the spine? Is it on the title page? Is it just in the teeny tiny credits that says text by Aubre Andrus? That's important for ghostwriting gigs and frankly any gig. That's always something to consider because sometimes it's a surprise if you didn't talk it through.
Right. And work for hire, they don't always necessarily put you front and forward, right?
Right, right. Like, for example, for my American Girl books, my name is always just on the inside title page. It's never on the spine. So it took quite a while for me to get a book. It was a scholastic novel where my name was on the front cover a few times, but I really wanted like a novel with my name on the spine. And I've got it quite a few times. But so that was a nice accomplishment to get.
Let's circle back because one of the other things that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch on was this idea of the marketing. With a work for hire, do you still do marketing like we do with all the other kinds of publishing that we do?
Well, it's interesting. As a work for hire author, you do have to stand up for yourself and your time. I have been asked to market books that I don't get royalties on, and I generally say no to that. Or I ask to be compensated for my time, and if they say no, we're not going to, then I say, well, then I'm not going to market it. And that's maybe risky on my part, but as someone who's writing a lot of books, I think people like to take advantage of writers and they think, oh, well, they're going to be so excited about this book. They're going to do anything. The main thing I said no to, I was asked to do a radio tour from like 6 in the morning till 2 p.m., just rapid fire interviews. And it was just an absurd amount of time and really stressful. And it was for a book I wasn't getting royalties for. And they weren't going to compensate me for my time. And I was just like, no, sorry.
And no is an option, right? And maybe there is a consequence down the road, but no is always an option.
Yeah, it is.
So that's good to know. The other thing that you mentioned and that you said you really like to talk about is making this a career, this writing business that we're in. And we all want that, right? Why don't you fill us in a little bit on your views of what that looks like or could look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of writing conferences in particular, they sort of just run through the same shtick over and over again, where it's like you write the book, you get the agent, you get the book deal. What they don't tell you is that even after you get the agent, it could take years, and then it could take years to get paid. And let's say you get a six-figure book deal, but they're going to give you a two-book deal, which sounds exciting, but that means now it's a $50,000 book deal. And then you figure in taxes and the 2 to 4 year timeline, and it's just not a lot of money. That's something that stopped me early on in the beginning, following this agent path of writing a book first and not being compensated for my time and not knowing when I would ever get paid for it. I really wanted to talk more about how you become a career author and what that looks like and what those different paths are. And so for me, as I mentioned, it was more like diversifying my income. It was doing these work for hire projects that I realized was a really good skill for a writer to have. Like most writing projects in the world are work for hire, where you're writing for someone else's brand or intellectual property, whether it's in Hollywood or whether it's like advertising or marketing. You being able to write in someone else's world and in their voice is a really good skill to have. And I don't think it's talked about enough, and it makes me crazy. So I love to shout it from the rooftops.
That is a very specific skill set that you can learn. And I talk about this a lot in The Craft of Writing, how writing is a skill. It's something that can be learned. There are a lot of people who think that you have to come at this like there's some innate ability. But I do believe that it's something you can learn. If you're passionate about it and you want to learn it, it's a skill that you can learn and you can hone.
Yeah, and with work for hire, I have really appreciated the guardrails it gives me. So not only have I signed a contract and gotten paid just for signing a contract, so now I really need to fulfill my deadline, but I have these guardrails. These are the characters. Every project is different. You might just get a title, you might get a more thorough outline, whatever, but you have these guardrails. And so for me, it was like a sandbox that was much easier to play in. Whereas like the idea of just like write a novel was so overwhelming to me. And I got really hung up on like, well, what kind of author am I going to be? Am I YA fantasy? Am I middle grade contemporary? I just like couldn't make a decision. So this has allowed me to slowly learn these skills. And I started with very simple projects. It was like a math and art activity book. And I worked my way up to like narrative nonfiction novels that are true stories and writing fiction for Disney Princess. And it really was this nice like baby steps into publishing. If you feel like you want to be an author, but you literally can't write a book on your own, you know what I mean? It was basically getting writing prompts, but getting paid for it. So it was really, really helpful for me to grow as a writer.
So, circling back to what you were saying earlier about writing 14 books in a year, work for hire can be very deadline driven, correct?
Yes, quick turnarounds, usually an entire book within 3 months. And not like you're actively writing for 3 months, but your series of drafts are probably happening within, in theory, a 3 month deadline. Usually the editors are running behind and it might get dragged out. But yeah, it's quick.
And how many of these are novel length that you've done, and how many are more on? Because you've said you've done everything from early readers up, and you get your guardrails, you get your guidance on what the world is, or who the characters are, or what the story needs to be. But you're talking 3 months. Can you write a novel in 3 months, or are we talking a little bit longer timeline for a novel, maybe?
I can write very fast. So I think that is another benefit of work for hire. It was refreshing for me to learn that a book doesn't have to take 3 years. It can be pumped out in 3 months, especially if you're focused and just rip roaring ready to go. You can't delay, you're getting paid for this. It has to get done. I think any freelance writer would tell you this, or any freelancer in general, or consultant. You need to learn how to find the balance of how many clients you can have at one time. So for me, that's like 3 to 4. So right now, for example, I'm working on a novel. I'm working on a picture book biography that's pretty intense, where I'm interviewing this woman and she's going to be heavily involved in the project, and it feels a little high profile. And I also have two more fun activity book type projects. So that's a good representation of what I have in any moment, where it's 1 to 2 bigger ones, 1 to 2 smaller ones. That's a good balance for me. But you also have to keep the pipeline going if you want to keep making money. So that is always a struggle. So I'm always, always reaching out to editors and reminding them I exist and asking if they have anything coming up. But fall is the busy time. This is when I get all of my assignments and go crazy. So this is the go time.
I know as a book coach that I have to manage my client list and my ongoing work very carefully. I have to know what I can take on. And sometimes I actually have to ask people to pay me for a space and hold that space later for them because I can't start them right away. But that's because, of course, we want to do our best work. We want to make sure that the projects get the attention they deserve, but we also know that we only have so much bandwidth.
Absolutely. It's really a delicate balance and takes some time to figure out. And there's certainly times I've been working at night because I overcommitted myself. And then there's times where I turned down a project and regretted it. I've been doing this for over 10 years and I still don't have it figured out perfectly.
Well, yeah, it's freelance. So there's always going to be those ups and downs, but there's ups and
Absolutely.
downs in publishing anyway. I mean, there are people
Hmm.
who sell that first book and then they sell a second book and then they sell a third book and then they can't sell a book to save themselves, right?
Right.
I just had Darcy Pattison on the show, and Darcy was a traditionally published author who was doing just fine. She was doing well, and then all of a sudden she wasn't, and she just couldn't hit the right person with the right thing at the right time. And so now she is one of the most prolific self-published authors that I know of, and she writes mostly nonfiction books that can be used in schools.
Hmm.
So you've got to find what works for you career-wise.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do also think that's an interesting point to bring up about, the authors that you think of that do other things or eventually have to do other things, because there are a lot of very high profile New York Times bestselling authors who do work for hire as well. So like Disney, for example, now I can tell when a project does work for hire. They do all these like twisted tales, they're called, where they're taking their characters and their villains and mixing them up. Those are absolutely work for hire. They're reaching out to a well-known author. I think like Melissa De La Cruz did like The Descendants, and I feel like that is a good example of Alloy Entertainment used to come up with book ideas in-house and then turn them into movies. So they'd write a book series knowing it was going to be a movie and a TV show and or. So Gossip Girl, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, Vampire Diaries, all of those started as like book ideas in-house. And so Melissa De La Cruz, I think she wrote Descendants. And I think that was the same idea where it's like we're writing this book series and then it's being turned into a film series. And then yeah, there's Morgan Matson did Grad Chanted and Prom Chanted. I'm pretty sure that I listened to a podcast interview and she was asked to be involved with that project. So a lot of times, even if you've been published traditionally as an author, you might get asked to write in somebody else's world and sandbox. And that's a nice way to keep your career going.
We see a lot of that, yeah, especially in speculative fiction too, because we see a lot of the science fiction and fantasy authors and horror authors also who write comics and get engaged in other realms. Like recently, I think it was Kendare Blake who wrote the Buffy tie-in for the upcoming reboot of Buffy.
Totally. Yeah, Netflix is doing it. There was a book called Damsel based on I think it was a movie or TV show. Yeah, there's so much out there. I know like Marie Lu and Rainbow Rowell, they've written in like for Marvel, I think. Maybe it's DC. But yeah, written in the superhero world. So you never really know where your writing chops can take you.
I see a lot more of it because I know a lot of authors who write in those realms. They write books for those series or for comics or what have you. I know one local author friend of mine who writes everything from Western through Star Trek novels and just all across the board, and mostly does work for hire. That's his bread and butter. There's a ton of work for hire. It's a very broad area. So let's talk a little bit about how your
Mhm.
average writer or a writer who's thinking about embarking on this could maybe break in.
Yeah, I think step one is just starting to network with editors. That is, you start paying attention to editors and what they're working on, and particularly what in publishing it's called licensing. So, what brands and IP, intellectual property, is a publisher producing? And is that a property or brand that you would be interested in writing for? So, for me, I wanted to write for Disney Princess. I thought that would be fun. So I found a way to network with an editor over there. So at conferences, you can approach an editor. For example, when I was much younger, I specifically went to a nonfiction middle grade panel that at the time was not popular at all. No one was interested in nonfiction or middle grade. It was quite a long time ago. And I approached her at the end. The presentation wasn't about work for hire, but I had an inkling that maybe she had some work for hire projects and she was specializing in nonfiction middle grade. And I asked her, and she did. And we both ended up actually being from the same college, and I got in that way. And like at Disney, I just blindly reached out to someone who I knew via her LinkedIn profile that she was from the Midwest. And we really hit it off and talked on the phone. You have to be good at networking and finding that connection with somebody and then being respectful of their time and not just reaching out to anybody. But, hey, I see that Disney is doing these princess stories and I'm wondering if it's work for hire. And here's my resume or my portfolio. And there's so many entry level projects in work for hire that I do think people underestimate how it's really okay to be like a newbie writer. And maybe not for like Disney, but there really are a lot of smaller projects out there that need to be written, and an editor might be willing to guide you through that.
So, what would you say are the key things that you might want to have on that resume or that writing CV to offer up when you are approaching someone that you've decided you want to network with because they're doing something you would really like to be a part of? What are the key elements that you think would be putting your best foot forward?
Yeah. I think for me, I found that there was a lot of opportunities in nonfiction, and my background is journalism. So my ability to research and interview and fact check and that kind of thing was really important to present to these people when I was first reaching out to projects. So it kind of depends on which project you're targeting. I also, because I was an editor at American Girl magazine, I had a ton of experience doing DIY projects for the magazine. So I could share that I actually knew how to develop an age appropriate, safe, successful activity idea for a child. I think another angle people really downplay is if you're a former teacher or librarian and you have so much experience working with children, that's something that I was lacking when I started out. I got some experience working at American Girl, but I didn't have kids at the time. I was right out of college. I wasn't a teacher, wasn't a librarian. So I feel like I have such a deeper breadth of knowledge now that I have a kid in elementary school. And it's just so helpful for book ideas, for knowing what's appropriate for that age level, that reading level, that skill level. So those are great things to mention too. If you were going for fiction, you would obviously probably need to give some writing samples. But on the nonfiction side, I think it really comes down to the ability to research and report and meet deadlines, interview people, and that kind of thing.
Aubrey, is there anything else that you want to touch on that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
I just really want to encourage people to consider what their strategy is for their author career and what's the dream project they want, and how could some smaller projects ladder you up to get there. For me, I really wanted to do a novel length book, and I kind of started with these narrative nonfiction short story, like 5 minute bedtime story compilations, and worked my way up. You kind of like got to step your way up to get there. So I think I just, yeah, want to emphasize how these work for hire projects can really help you build your skills slowly and with oversight directly from an editor while you're getting paid, and help you reach your career dreams. And nothing's stopping me from writing a novel right now and getting an agent. So you can still pursue many different paths of publishing at the same time, including self-publishing. Everything's kind of fair game these days. So you can design the career that makes the most sense for you and have that goal that you're reaching toward, and use these opportunities to try to help you get there.
I like what you said about working with an editor because that's a great experience to have. And a lot of writers don't know what that's going to feel like until they get there. But if you're doing work for hire, you get a little more of that interaction. As a book coach, I am basically a freelance editor as well. And so a lot of my clients get that kind of exposure before they end up submitting anywhere or getting a publisher. So they have that experience, but a lot of writers don't. They don't have that direct editorial feedback and a relationship. And that it is a relationship. It's not just a one way, here, go rewrite this. It doesn't work like that. It's more interactive.
Yeah, that is such a good point, because I have heard horror stories of even like kind of big names getting a book deal, but then having it fall apart because they didn't understand the editing process and the publishing process and how you're a member of the team. There's a lot of people that are dipping their toes into this project. It's not just you. So I do think that is gold. And how else are you getting that experience? So it really has been good. And it's great. You get feedback on your writing from an editor, not from a random writing partner, like another aspiring writer. There's nothing wrong with that, but like this is a professional who knows what's going on in the industry now. And you can ask them any questions you want. And it's really amazing to have editors at your fingertips. They're wonderful.
All right. Well, we have come to the point in our discussion where we like to give action items, something actionable to take away for our listeners. What have you got for us today, Aubrey?
Yeah, I would say think about like three different brands or like intellectual property. So when I say that, I mean like TV characters, book characters, movie characters that you would like to write in. What world would you like to write in? And you could use this just as a writing prompt, or you could actually then go try to see which publishers are actually publishing books from this brand or franchise. You can always read credits in a book and try to find an editor's name, or check LinkedIn, do your research and try to see if you can find any connection with this project and throw your name in the hat for the future.
I think that's a great idea. And I think another good way to do that is to visit your local bookstore or library, especially your library, and go through the series because a lot of times work for hire is part of a larger series and you're looking at writing books in those series, and go through those and look for who's handling that and find a way to connect or network in.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point. Series themselves sometimes become brands. So think of like the Who Is biography series, or think of Little Golden Books. Those are also quote unquote brands or IP that you could write under. So sometimes publishers create their own super successful series, and you can be a part of those. I wrote an American Girl advice and activity book. They have this whole line of those, the Smart Girls Guides, they're called. And that was so cool to be a part of that series. I'm sure there's at least one series that you love and that you could possibly get your foot in the door for.
Well, and we were talking earlier, and for my action item, I want to revisit this because we were talking earlier that you have a handout or a guide that you have produced that's 10 types of projects that are work for hire.
Yes.
And you can offer us a link to that.
Yeah, so if you go to my website, it's aubreandrus.com/podcast. So I'll spell my name for you. It's AUBREANDRUS.com/podcast. I'll have a little download that has 10 types of work for hire projects. You can peruse that and see where your skills would best fit. Because there is a wide range of these types of projects, from fiction to nonfiction and early readers to more advanced scientific middle grade, heavily researched books. So I'm sure there's something on that list that might pique your interest and that could maybe help you further your career.
And that's my action item. I'm kind of stealing from Aubre to do an action item this month, but my action item is go download that list. If you're interested in work for hire, Aubre's done the work. She's been here, done that, been doing it for some time. She's got this nice list of projects that you can peruse. And I think you also have a webinar about this topic.
I do. Yeah, I can include the link there as well, where I kind of deep dive into why I love work for hire so much. So, yeah, I can share that link as well. If you head over to my website, you should be able to find it. But if you go to the aubreandrus.com/podcast, I'll make sure to include the link to both the webinar and the download.
So, Aubre, where else can we find you online?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, my website, aubreandrus.com. The webinar that you mentioned is at aubreandrus.com/WFH if you want to find the webinar directly. I'm on Instagram at Aubre Andrus and at Blue Sky, all the places. Trying not to be on them too much, though, lately. I'm trying to focus on just writing my books.
Awesome. We'll go ahead and include those in the show notes. Aubre, it's been great talking to you. This is a great topic. I think that our listeners will have a lot to think about and a lot to take away from this. So thank you so much for being here. It's been such a joy to talk to you about work for hire.
Yeah, this has been so much fun. Thank you for chatting with me and sharing the love.
Bye for now.
All right, bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coaching Kidlit, a writing and book coaching podcast for writers who want to level up their Kidlit game. For more episodes, visit coachingkidlit.com. And to find out more about what a book coach can do for you, visit my website, bookcoachingbysharon.com.